Welcome to Baby Boomer Video Tales. My name's Jim. It's nice to have you here with us today. Our guest today is Zenobia Silas-Carson, and I'm going to bring her on right now. I think you really enjoy this video, so sit back, relax, let's have a good time. Zenobia, hello, how are you?
Hi. Hi, Jim.
Thank you for joining us today. I'm going to give this whole thing to you pretty much. I'll try not to interrupt you. I have been known to just interrupt and not mean to, but just do it anyway. So if I do that, and you can tell me to sit down, don't worry about it, and we'll be okay.
We'll be fine.
Okay, so why don't we just start at the beginning? Where do you want to start? I'll just give that to you right now.
Well, we can start with I'm originally from Chicago, Illinois, born and raised, and I live now in Brooklyn Park, which is like a northwest suburb of Minneapolis. But I've lived here for 32 years now. Yeah.
So
So,
that quite a while up in the snow country, huh?
oh yes, it's all different for me. In Illinois, I think we have that lake effect snow, and here we've got the icy winds coming right in from Canada. So it's kind of the same for me. People were like, "Why would you live there?" And I think, "Why would I not? I I was born in cold weather."
As I get older, I like winter more because it gives me an excuse not to have to go outside and mow or all that stuff. So I really
Absolutely.
like the winter.
Yes, I love winter. You can do all your snuggly, cozy things, and I love hot chocolate and warm comforters and all that good stuff. So I enjoy winter. I really do.
Yes, summer's not bad. It gets awfully hot here in the Kansas City area. I was in Minneapolis one summer for a Promise Keepers meeting, and we
Oh,
played golf. And I remember it was a pretty warm day, and it was pretty humid up there.
yes, yes, it does get that way. We can go up to triple digits sometimes, especially around July, August. We have been known to have a couple of triple digit days. And I would not heed. One year I didn't heed the warnings. They said, if you're over 60 or you're a baby, stay in the house. And I was out walking and I began to see mirages. I'm like, oh no, I better go inside.
Better go inside. You don't want a heat stroke. That is a
No,
fact.
no.
That's a fact. I've come fairly close a couple times, and
Uh-huh.
this last time I think I freaked my wife out. I was weed eating, and
Ah,
it was hot, and I shouldn't have been doing that.
yeah,
But you
yeah.
do what you do, and then you look at it later and think, oh, that wasn't
Mm,
the smartest thing.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, tell me a bit about yourself, Zenobia.
Well, I would like maybe to start out with my parents, how they met. And they didn't actually know each other. They came from the same town, actually a city in Mississippi, Meridian, in Lauderdale County. And they were on opposite ends of, I don't know, the spectrum. I don't know. My mother's people were deeply religious and able to grow their own everything. They grew everything. Someone sold them land that uh, prospered. It just they grew everything, their animals and their food. But my dad came from a family that didn't do that, and he was an only child. His mother died when he was very young, so they didn't really know each other. I think on one trip to what they call going to town, my mother spied him. She saw him. She was about 10 years old. And she thought in her mind and in her heart that he might be something to me one day. And my grandmother told her, don't look at him. He's a little motherless child. And my mother didn't understand that. And my dad said he glimpsed her a couple of times, but nothing like that came to him. Years later, during World War II, women were encouraged, especially single women, to write to soldiers just anonymously, just to keep up their morale. And my mother joined that group of women and began to write to different soldiers. And my dad got her letter in one of his batches of letters and thought that must be that Reverend Thomas's daughter. And that turned out that she was. And they began to write exclusively. Long story short, he wanted to marry her, almost sight unseen. He hadn't seen her since she was a little girl. And my grandparents were not in favor of that. So after the service, he was discharged and he went to Chicago, where he lived for a little while. He could not get my mom out of his mind, so he took a chance, went to Meridian to ask her hand in marriage from my granddad. And my grandfather agreed, asked my mother if that's what she wanted. They got married that day. That was the first time they'd ever touched, held hands. There was no dating before that. There was nothing. And Dad had secured a job on the railroad, so he had to take her away that day. So a lot happened in one day. And then he got her to Chicago and she cried, he said, for about a month because she wasn't accustomed to those tall buildings and fast moving cars and that whole thing. So that's 1946. And I was born the next year in 1947. So I had these parents who were, virtual strangers, but they made it work the best they could. Daddy was a hard worker. My mother was a school teacher. She had been one in the South. And so I was the only child for 6 years. And she began to teach me. She bought a blackboard and all kinds of things. And she began to teach me not only to print, but to write. So by kindergarten, I could write in cursive. And the teachers were amazed. They're like, what is she doing? And I'm like, I don't want to print. I don't like this. And I would leave the class and go to find more interesting classes. So I was quite the precocious kid. I loved art. My dad would I did cartooning. My dad would bring home graph paper from the factory and I'd lay on my belly on the floor and just create houses and people and characters and speak for the characters. And my dad is standing there going, do you see what she's doing? She is making a whole scenario here. And what is that? And so I began doing that. I started playing piano very early. And my
Now
dad,
you were bumped up in school, right?
yes. They threw me out of kindergarten after 2 weeks and put me first grade. And then they moved me again when schools had those two grades, like 4A and 4B. So I only stayed because I got all excellence all the time. And so they bumped me out of there to put me in just one fourth grade class. And they said, she's bored in here too, so let's move her ahead. And by the time I was in, I think, seventh grade, I was barely 11, if I'm remembering correctly. And just shy of 12, actually, I was 13, but just shy of 12 when I went into high school.
Wow.
So
You
I
know,
was, yeah.
I could have stayed in high school until I was about 20 if the teachers wouldn't have liked me, just push me, get me out of there.
Were they pushing you out? I was academically ready, but not. I advise all parents to not push their children. If they're academically ready, it's one thing, but emotionally ready is another thing. And I was not emotionally ready
Yeah.
for high school. And things went on from there. My parents divorced when I was 13. And it changed the entire, my mother was, I always say, the head Christian in charge in our family. She insisted on our biblical learning, and she was a Sunday school teacher, and she was the BYF teacher, which is Baptist Youth Fellowship. She did all sorts of things. She was very active in church. My dad stayed home on Sundays. He said, not for me. And what prompted him to come to our church, because mother never pushed, she never said, well, you need to get in here with us. He overheard my prayers. And we were praying and my brother had to be about 2 or 3 years old, and my mother had us get down by the bed and pray every night. And I asked at the end of that prayer, why didn't Daddy pray with us? And my dad, just being so in love, I had my dad actually wrapped around my finger at a very early age, and it broke his heart. He's like, I could not stand to hear her say that I didn't come to church. So he came to church. He was still stubborn, and he'd sit there during the sermons with his arms folded tightly across his chest, and he's waiting for that sermon to be over so we could go home. And my mother would just sit there and keep doing what she was doing. And we prayed for Daddy all the time. And one Sunday at the altar call, you would have thought somebody, he was like a jack in the box. He jumped out of the pew and ran down to the altar and got on his knees and gave his heart to Christ. And I looked at my mother, and tears were just streaming down her face because that's what she had been praying for the whole time. And he got busy. He became Sunday school superintendent. He was a deacon. He was all over the place in the church. Yeah.
So, what happened when you were about 13 with your folks?
They decided to get a divorce. And our little family was such a tight unit. We were, Dad sat at a particular place at the kitchen table, and Mother served up the food. And Mother was also a writer. She had her own column in a small Chicago newspaper. And so there was just there was my little brother and myself. And all of a sudden, because they didn't argue audibly, they weren't these forceful people arguing. I knew that sometimes they didn't get along, but they never had, big, loud discussions. And all of a sudden, Daddy was leaving. And my mother hinted at the divorce, but I didn't quite, nobody in my circle, their parents were all there. If your dad was gone, he probably had to be dead, because they all the parents I knew were couples. They were still together. So that kind of set me apart, and it set an emotional thing in me that I already felt set apart. I
Because
already
of being so young in school?
Yes, yes. So already set apart. I was a nerd like kid that the kids picked on a lot. They only needed me if they needed an essay written, or, Zenobia, help me with this. And I was always hopeful that this would mean I would be included, but it never was. It was just, we need you for right now. And I wore thick glasses. If you think these are thick, I wore very thick glasses and knee socks. And my mother made sure that I was dressed modestly. So there were no, what do they call them now? Capris, but they were pedal pushers back in the day. And so there was none of that. And I was always the kid with patent leather shoes, ruffled socks, even as a young child, and dresses with a sash in the back that was tied into a bow. So, I stood out.
Once you were in high school, you probably really did, huh?
Yes,
Yeah.
and I tried to modify my clothing several times, and got caught at it. I would try to make my skirts shorter and embellish my body in other ways, but that didn't work either. And I wanted boys to like me. I was like 13 years old, and I wanted a boyfriend. And I listened to all the romantic songs. When my mom wasn't there, she's at work, I listened to all of the Beatles or anybody. Well, the Beatles weren't really out then, but there were other songs that I really like. Dion and the Belmonts, and that whole bunch. And I just envisioned this knight in shining armor. He had to be about 14, would come along and take me away. Which brings to mind, I was 14 and ran away with my 16-year-old boyfriend, and we were hauled back in by the police. We had about $20 between us, and we were going to go to Kentucky because we looked it up, and we said, in Kentucky, you can get married at 16. And the police laughed us all the way into my house, and they kept asking, and you were going to do what? we, we're going to get married because we're in love. And they just broke out into all kinds of laughter.
Yeah, you
But
don't know
yeah,
what love is when you're 14, 16 years
I
old.
didn't
You
know
might
any.
think you do, but there's no
I
way.
had no clue. I had no clue, and nor did he. It was just a way of that young people had of believing they could escape whatever, whether it was rules, regulations, parents, home environment. Those are all the things that sometimes will lead a child to believe that they need to be away. I gotta go, you know.
Yeah,
So,
it happens to a lot of kids, and thank God you survived that.
oh, so not only survived it, but and I got into some more trouble. Like they called girls getting in trouble in those days was if you were expecting a baby, and I got into that kind of trouble and didn't have the baby. I miscarried the child, but my mother was very very upset and she was very disappointed. My dad was as well. He was still in my life, even though they weren't together. And their decision was to take me, for my mother to take me down south, where a bevy of aunts and uncles and grandparents and all these people were going to keep a watch over me.
So you
And
moved back to Mississippi.
over to Mississippi. I didn't like Mississippi because I didn't know anything about Mississippi. That's their place. We were born in Chicago, so we didn't know anything about Mississippi. And she took me back in the height of the civil rights thing was going on at the time. So things that I could do in Chicago, I couldn't do in Mississippi, and I hadn't thought of that because we had only seen unrest on TV. And I would ask the kids, I got money. You want to come and have a Coke with me? Or they're like, we can't have Cokes in where you want to go. And
Can't go
so
to the Woolworths and sit at the counter.
not at all. And
Right.
and that was my experience from living in Chicago. And I realized then that these teenagers, same age as myself, had bigger fish to fry than I ever had. They had things that they knew that didn't know, I wasn't aware of. And so I learned deeper lessons in Mississippi in that 1 year that I stayed. And a terrible incident happened and further brought me back to Chicago. And one of the boyfriends that I'd had in Chicago came to get me to marry me. And my mother, by then I was 17, and she thought, well, maybe, okay, I will just sign and let you get married. But I was no more ready for marriage than I was when I was 14. So, yeah, we embarked on that marriage. My husband was just skimming off 19 years of age. He was barely 20. So both our parents at that time had to sign for us. And he kept good jobs. He was a hardworking man, but we were just too young, too immature to pull that off.
Now, let's fast forward. How did you go from this? And I know that you had a lot rougher road
Yeah.
even after that. I understand it, and it was a hard thing, and a lot of people wouldn't have survived it. But let's fast forward to where you're at today, and what you're into, and how God has blessed you. I'd like to
Oh
hear that.
my. Oh my goodness. I have to smile. Have to really keep from laughing to think of, because when you look over your shoulder sometimes at your past, and there will be even people in my life who have attempted to throw my past in my face. They'll say, well, look what you were doing. And I really loved, I have to go to scripture right now, Jeremiah 29:11. And I'm going to paraphrase because and I don't want to leave anything out, but the Lord tells us that he has the plans for our lives. He knows the plan for our lives. And those plans include hope and a future. And he always had that plan for my life, that little unpopular, out of place girl. When we feel that way, God always has that place for us. He has the missing puzzle piece. And he waits so gently and so patiently for us to return. You have to want to return. And when I came here to Minnesota, of course, I'd gotten all my children back, and some of them by then, were adults. And they had seen some behaviors in me that were not always wonderful, because I would jump off I call it jumping off the potter's wheel. I'm done now, Lord. I think you've got all the sticks and stones out of me, and I'm going to go my way. No. And I became homeless in 1990. I had been working very hard. One of my daughters had run away, and I had to keep up with what the police were needing me to do, and keep up with my job and all those things. And I missed 2 paychecks. And I used to always tell people, you can be a paycheck away. And there we were, homeless. And Illinois had begun to be unfamiliar to me, and raising teenagers there was almost impossible. Someone came to recruit my boys once on my porch, and for a gang. And in those days, I used to keep things in the corners of my house. I had a metal bat, and I ran them off the porch with them. I told them, I'm the gang leader in here. What do you? But
I'd run too. Yeah.
yeah, they took off.
Yeah.
But times got harder, and as they became more really deep, uh, getting a bat was not going to be the answer. You had to really think about what you were going to do. And I literally put my finger on the map and said, okay, Minnesota it is. And I had just my youngest son with me, David. And he looked at me like, uh-oh, here we go. And he said, who do we know there? I said, oh, nobody. We're just going to go. And I did have one friend in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And I'd known her for many years. And she said, well, you can come and live with me. And we lived there for a while. I worked at a nursing home there. And then I met a guy. And okay, I'll say it. And he was an old biker. He was a biker that wouldn't give up. The last vestiges of his ponytail were still there. And he could still squeeze himself into his leathers. And I've been on the back of that Harley many times. But in the midst of all of that, God kept speaking to me. He kept speaking to me. He said, ask Ken, and his name was Ken, what about Minneapolis? Minneapolis kept coming to my mind. And that's just God bringing it to my mind. And he said, oh, I used to live there. Let me show you what it looks like. So we took a road trip, and I fell in love with Minneapolis. I began to correspond with people there who were in social services and that type of thing. And they said, well, you got to come here so we can help you. So we drove all of my stuff there to Minneapolis. We lived in a shelter for a while. And I went out. Oh, I had also acquired a 10-month-old grandson. And I had him with us. And every day I go out looking for apartments. And I found one. And look, lo and behold, the caretaker there was also raising her 10-month-old granddaughter under different circumstances. And she said, well, I can put you up into a place here. And I mean, the rest is almost history, but I can tell you, once I got established in Minneapolis, I went back to school. I'd never finished high school. So I went back, grabbed my GED. Many grants and contributions later, I was able to get into college and get my human services certification. I started working with battered women, women who were, I think they call it re-entering or in re-entry from the prison life that they've been in. And I got into plays, theater groups. I began doing readings throughout the Twin City, got into a place called The Loft, which is a place for writers, and won 2 mentorships over there in African American literature. Um, my life just began to take off in ways that I wasn't accustomed to. It was just amazing what God was doing with my life. Put my finger on a newspaper one day and got into a church called New Life. And it was very, very fitting that the church's title was New Life, because there I re-accepted, because I'd already accepted a ministry in 1986 and had gotten away from it. And they said, if you want to come and minister to the women, we'd be glad to have you. I started doing stuff, not I. God started doing stuff in my life that was amazing and remains amazing. I just finished up a job. I'm going on 75. I am not ashamed to say it, because God has so blessed my life. And a lot of ladies won't tell you their age, but I will tell you my age, because God has blessed me to be here. And a job where it wasn't a job, right here in the building where I work or did work. I was office assistant, but God used those doors to open for a ministry where I had women's Bible study. I was overseeing 3 food programs. This is a 55 plus building. So these are my peers and I love them. And just doing for 12 years here.
Well,
And I
you're a
didn't want to.
prolific writer, and you used to have a blog. I found that on the internet.
Oh,
Found a
yes,
couple books that you have written, and you told me when we were preparing for this that you're writing a book right now.
yes, yes.
So that someday will come out. When you do publish it, you'll let me know, and I can tell people.
We hope this year. We
Okay.
hope this year. I have help. I have really good support and really good help now for this one. And I think it's going to take off maybe by near the end of this year. And
Okay.
I'm really excited about that. And
Now,
and
does
I've
the
been
book go
very
with your
careful.
ministry? Is it a Christian book
Yes, it
or
is.
okay?
Yes, it is. It's tentatively, I can never say that word, entitled Unpacking
Aluminum.
My
I
Trunk.
can't say that. Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's just a tentative title, but it's called Unpacking My Trunks, and it is. Uh, uh, I call it a testimony. Actually, it speaks of where God has brought me, and will encourage, hopefully, many people who have these things in their past that they think that God will never forgive them, or no one will ever forgive them. And God is just God, and He's waiting for us to give that up, stop embracing that past. Yes, we had it, but He is in control. And when He's in control, and you just give everything over to Him, and you say, "Okay, God, I can't. It's too big for me. It's just too big for me. Here, you can have it." And
Uh,
when He fully takes over, get
that's
ready.
amazing. That's amazing. That's a fact. Uh, we're starting to run a little short on time now.
Okay.
Uh, Zenobia, you have so much in you. I'd like to have you back someday. If
Okay.
that'd be okay with you, someday we'll do this again, and you can
Okay.
do everything that you'll remember that you forgot after the broadcast is over.
Yes.
So I want to thank you so much. I'm going to cut away from you now. Thank you so much for being with
Thank you
us
for
today.
having me. God bless you.
Okay, so that was Zenobia Silas-Carson. And if you need to know any more about Zenobia, you can contact us at babyboomertales@gmail.com. I just want y'all to know that kindness is one of the most important things you can do as a human being. This is Jim. Peace out.